Nice, excellent, cool. I'll start with this. So this is a moment in competitive 40K and sort of rules discussions where somebody, a player, figured out that if you are supposed to deep strike 9 inches away from somebody with your radar, and you're measuring from the hull, that of course means that because C is 9 inches, that distance B is less than 9 inches. Hey, you get out of there, you will have a less than 9 inches charge on your nearest target. So we had literally the first piece of sort of human math history, the center, like rule of Pythagoras around triangles and length of the different sides. Interact with the rule system to the point where the designers had to publish a commentary or a designer intention that no, you don't get to charge out of 9-inch rules, even though it's basically like base mathematically possible. But it was just a bizarre conversation to watch where somebody's like, oh, I discovered something. It's just, yeah, you discovered 2 + 2 is 4. Like this was obvious already from the start. And then the response to that was a rule amendment or a design commentary. So just this completely bizarre moment here that made me ask this question of like, what are these rules even, and why are they so broken that this is necessary? What is this entire weirdo conversation that is happening here? So I was interested in and wanted to write about the rules of playing 40K as an actual game. I ended up much closer to especially the questions that Christian poses here. So we will see how I go into 20 minutes from deep strike charge rangers to political activism. My name is Patrick Prax. I'm the associate professor in game design at Uppsala University. I'm sitting in the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. And I have also recently published in DIGRA paper about playing 40K on Tabletop Simulator. Network participation sets the game free. Warhammer 40K on Tabletop Simulator. Ask me or check it out. I have a PhD in media studies that was about co-creative design in World of Warcraft. There's a TED talk about that, TEDx, if you want to check that out. And otherwise, if I'm not sort of using my 40K work as a palate cleanser, I'm working with sustainability in the games industry. So here in GDC talk about sustainability teaching in games and educations. This is me playing 40K on Tabletop Simulator. You see all of my raiders here nicely positioned outside of the artillery range from Hiveguard. This is sort of how I mostly play, but I also have some minis. So these are what I've recently been playing and painting. And also we have our little friend over here who's saying hello. Recent project just got done. Cool. So trying to take a look at the rules of 40K and actually playing this mildly insane, we've just heard, hostile game. There's so many layers that it's sort of comical. You start out with the basic rule set. Then you need to figure out how they have been recently updated in quarterly updates or in rules updates that already supersede publications and are valid before the book even comes out. Figure out what the latest FAQ is and like frequently asked questions. They have elements that are discussing the designer's intent. Then you need to figure out, if you're going to a competitive event or any sort of game that is using these, what the newest World Team Championship rules are for the game in general, terrain rules, your specific army, figure out what the tournament pack is, what terrain pack they're using, if you're having to correct the bases for your miniatures, because maybe a new pack has come out and changed the base size for your gene stealers, so now you have to rebase all of them, because that's fun. You need to check if your models are assembled correctly, because nowadays there's more problems with assembly for advantage, and then maybe go to Bahapedia anyways, which is a Russian site that accumulates all of these rules, because it's literally the only place where you can find them all accumulated so that you get any sort of viable overview. And anyways, you need to play by intent, because otherwise the rules just don't fucking work. And oftentimes, if there's any issue, be quick and call the judge quickly before it spirals out of control. Hey, judges are pretty good if you're playing in any of the sort of most viable and biggest competitive communities in TTS. In Europe and Northern Europe, the guy who's in the judge channel, for example, available like 24 hours a day, kind of, is also the guy who coded the dice roller on the gaming table. So it's like literal experts, global experts, helping you out to get your game functioning, because otherwise it just might not. So trying to make parsing that a little bit. I'm not exactly sure what kind of method I would be using here. I have been doing some autoethnographic work here. I have been playing 40K. I've been online here. On these sort of online tournaments, you find pretty good enemies and opponents pretty quickly. So I've been playing with some of the members of, or former members of the Swedish national team. and also been winning some of those games. I managed to win one of the tournaments on the Copenhagen server that is hosting some of this like last year. So that was #live goals. So I can move in these sort of circles and understand enough to parse what competitive 40K looks like. Another option would be formal analysis of game rules, but that only really gets you so far, and we will see why that is. And then we get pretty quickly into some sort of notions of political economy and looking at what the rules and what the structures are behind why these rules are created. Or maybe looking at what kind of discourses there happen behind notions of what is legitimate rules and what shouldn't count as legitimate ruling. I would like to have as feedback from you guys, or from you folks here as well, to hear a little bit of what you consider would be useful knowledge for your works, especially sort of political critiques that are trying to make a point for example, wargaming more broadly. And I hope I will get there. So these rules operate, oftentimes, yes, we have actual rules of the game that are trying to tell you how to play the game, but even then they oftentimes have designer intent here. We will get there. I want to start with discussing the physicality of the models though, because sometimes it's kind of funny and it's kind of an interesting way that shows how these sort of intricacies in the rules already immediately don't quite work. So this is an example from a game that I was watching yesterday. You see that the WTC 2024 objective markers from the Irish team are here. This is like high-level play. It's Chaos Demons against Tyranids, and I would like to get your attention down here to this Norn emissary who moved up to shoot at some demons, right? So we have this big Tyranid creature standing over here. You can see my mouse on the screen, right? So at the beginning of the arrow, and it moves over and spins around. The miniature turns 180 degrees, and now its tail can see behind the ruin, and it can shoot at the demons, right? So the fact that this creature, this model, has a tail that looks out like several inches here becomes a huge gameplay element for optimizing your movement, because now that player could get several inches of more movement, stand on the objective, still get line of sight behind this wall and shoot. The physicality of these models is extremely relevant for play, right? That leads to having a huge conversation around, for example, modeling for advantage, where right here we have a flying suppressor or whatever who doesn't have a flying sense on the ground, so he's maybe not as visible across ruins. Like a little space marine that is on a huge base suddenly and can reach more people in their fighting phase, or even more humorous examples, a Wraith Lord kneeling down, some creative magnetization of the bolter of a librarian, right? So these sort of discussions happening all the time, where we have then tournament organizers reinforcing that you have to assemble your models based on the picture on the box. So basically the assembly picture, the marketing image that is like, this is how you serve this dish, but the parcel isn't part of it, version of what 40K miniatures are when you sell them, suddenly becomes hard-coded rules because it's so very gameplay relevant. And then some boxes don't have any images, so how would you even do this, right? This hard rule in the London GT that you can only assemble your models based on what the image is on the box was prompted by a player playing like this, very creatively, just putting all of their Harlequin vehicles upwards so that you can squeeze them all here into this ruin where they are perfectly in cover. Which is like, is it legal? I mean, is it a rule how this is supposed to be built or not? This is really complicated because the physicality of the model. What happens if you have a 3D print or something broke off, or if you like, yeah, here these don't have the players that are normally sitting inside on the model installed, because everybody uses them as additional models to build your army, and they are really annoying and fall off all the time, right? So this is like suddenly becoming a problem that we need to discuss. Is this a part of the rules of the game? Another example that isn't even as crazy, right? This is the Tyranid Exocrine. I have one at home. Its gun protrudes a little bit over the front of the base, which means that you can have the base stand behind a ruin, but still draw line of sight from the top of the gun that you've just snuck past. So you can be somewhat safely from shooting, still get cover and everything, but see, because your model overhangs your base, which is using one of these sort of problems in this game design of 40K, where it's very, very complex. Of course, you can put the model here in the back and the gun overhangs only a little bit, but you can also put it more in the front and squeeze out a few adult inches and a bit more like range, right? So you can figure out what my exocrine looks like. That's not obviously this one. because that has absolute gameplay relevance. Is something that if you look at a review of this model, people will say, yeah, one of the ways of using it is this. This is just legitimately just play, right? It's used as rules, right? So, and we haven't even discussed TTS yet, or whatever is happening in that space, and we will get to that in a second. But yes, there we have also elements that have to do with, and harking back both to Adam's talk earlier about IP questions and to questions about legitimacy of Games Workshop and the behavior. So we talked a little bit about physicality here and have immediately seen there's some discontent here. Physicality comes in as a huge element of the rules that has massive impact on the game, but it's never really discussed and is sort of just swinging around in the background. Then we have the actual rules that even contain design intent, right? This means that these rules get frequently updated. It's very, very hard to collect an updated set of rules. People complain that they have to carry books around that aren't even valid anymore. We have recommendations from, or the recommendations that are run at Games Workshop events that become de facto rules. So Games Workshop is running a tournament. They have a small rules pack, and now everybody's like, oh, these are the new rules for Warhammer. It's like, why? How? How does this function? Who's making this? We have an app that is maybe legitimate or maybe not, but hanging behind, but could be correct. And we have these questions of designer intent, right? So they are all very, very different, all very, very hard to find. I think the most boggling to me is design intent. As a game designer, as a games researcher, including the intention of the designer into how a game has to be played is completely bizarre. That's the reason why we write rules, so that that wouldn't impact it. That is the place where the creativity of the player starts to do something with these rules themselves, or maybe the community to do something with it. This is just straight up not part of the authority of the game designer anymore to say, oh no, but I think you should have played this differently. Like in most other spaces, this is explicitly what makes games as an expressive medium interesting, is that here the authorship of the designer stops and the authorship and the creativity of the player and the community starts. Keep your hands off that. If Super Mario managed to get to the pipes by running on top of the level, good on you, players, great work, you get to do that. It's not your way, your space as a game designer to come and say, no, 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 you're doing it wrong. I wanted this to be different. Shut the fuck up. So interesting that it here is taken as law. Everything that has Games Workshop on it is somehow rules, right? This would mean that at some point, like, no, high jumping like this, we can't have that. That looks stupid. You aren't allowed to do that. It's like, what do you mean? It's a competition. This way is really good to jump higher, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to win the tournament, right? That's how this would normally go. But here we have this functioning differently in a way that is explicit designer intention as rules writing. So then we can really focus here on understanding how these rules function, on where do they come from. Games Workshop does own the IP, yes, and we've heard that. That makes sense, of course. But on the other hand, we have this large competitive community that is really active in making their own rule systems and playing the games. The World Team Championship that I mentioned earlier is running every year since a long time. They're running their own rules documents, and they're making them by gathering the heads of what basically amounts to the national teams. Of course, there's a Western bias, right? And mostly US American and European and Northern European teams. But it has been growing and has been trying to extend that more, getting them together and asking them what kind of consents the rules they have on how to play the game. They are hugely impactful. Before that, in earlier times, Frontline Gaming was making the scoring system because competitive 40K didn't function based on a normal rule set. It just couldn't really be played in a competitive manner. And still, we need referees available all the time. Just to dive here a second into WTC, right? So they have the rules fact for the normal game. They have rules for terrain. They have special rules for your army. These are so extensive that this is a 12-page document just discussing what kind of terrain rules they apply. And they have a chapter on charging through walls and fighting through walls, where they completely upend one of the core elements that make it so that in normal Games Workshop rules, you can make it possible to not be interacted with in melee combat by just standing the just right amount behind a wall, because now your superhuman power armored Space Marine cannot break through this thin ruin walls anymore. And they have changed that to get a more interactive play. These two schools of play, where this is possible or not, are massively impactful on army building. and change the entire game. So we have these sort of spaces that are really changing how the game functions here in very, very complex and intricate ways. How's Games Workshop dealing with this? Well, for the most part, they are buying these sort of skills. They are buying either the people who have been running the tournaments or have been writing the rules and basically employing them to run as their own community managers or their competitive events team. So they are taking over these sort of elements of co-created participant culture that was made by players for players, taking them over wholesale, and still ending up in a situation where they have to debate whether or not Pythagoras is correct or not. It's like they're just not very good in dealing with rules. That means that my conclusion here so far is that 40K rules are really a mess. Yes, they are an assemblage in some capacity, depend on player co-creation, because without player co-creation, the game is borderline unplayable. Games Workshop is buying whatever they need in order to get control over the sort of writing process. Anything that has Games Workshop on it is considered for some reason in the community as legitimate, and physicality still has a huge impact, which is massively disruptive to, for example, other developers that are also making interesting miniatures. It's disruptive to people who are modeling and building their own models at home, right? This hobby element of creating your own, that isn't reflected there. You cannot use your own homebrew miniatures in a competitive game because you might get an advantage that just has different visibilities. All of these subtle things suddenly become hard rules, right? That brings us to this question of why is this way? And here the political economy comes in really full force. Miniatures before narrative, before rules, seems to have been an organizational logic of Games Workshop for a long time. At least that's sort of what the story tells. But here we have also profits before narrative, before rules, right? And that brings like basic stuff like, yes, my witches now, they used to run with cool, like they're nice little shard nets, they're things that were running there. That is not possible anymore because now the only way you can kit out a squad of 40K miniatures is exactly the way they come in the box. The verse that impacted my son's Harlequin army, who had an entire build where you kitted them out with fusion pistols, but there was only 2 in the box. So now a squad can only have that. So basically the self-standing existing army for several years is just not that anymore. And he cannot play his figures. They're just unplayable at this point. So, and just to show, now I've shown like here different versions of minis on Tabletop Simulator. I also wanted to show you a picture that shows just how freaking awesome these things can look and what kind of amazing work these people and players are putting in. Like this is miniatures that you can play on Tabletop Simulator. They look fantastic. So yeah, profits before design and before rules is one thing. We have this huge movement to monopolization before community. It's taking away the power to decide for players themselves, for the communities, by implementing rules and take them over into official competitive rule sets. Warhammer Competitive is trying to be taken over by Games Workshop, who are giving out their Charlie the Chocolate Factory golden tickets, not understanding it as a dystopian story. And they have inviting people from all sort of areas to come to their sponsored events and basically just throwing cash at the problem to try to buy the community, which so far is working fairly okay, sadly. They are pushing a subscription model where you basically need to have the app, buy the new cards to play missions, right? Like by selling a new mission card pack every half year just means that now every half a year you need to buy something from them in order to basically just be able to play. There's no other reason to make this cards that you draw than that you now have to buy something from them, and it cannot really be easily done on your third-party app anymore. So basically what is now deciding what is going on here is platform capitalism. This design philosophy is not steered by what is the best game, what is the best community, what is best for miniature gaming. It's about what can be monopolized best and in what way can this be pitched, not as Games Workshop doing a cool thing with Warhammer, but as a way of basically building to be the platform and the only space for miniature gaming. However, it's not really their game. They are a company that makes nice plastic toys. That's what they are. And that's what they should fucking stay. We consider their rules to be the official version of the game, but mostly only by virtue of accepting for some reason the barriers and borders of what the corporation Games Workshop is as the things that people say from there, this is the rules of the game, even though they are doing a bad job where they are not even making a playable game without the work of all the community creators, the referees, the people that are spending their own time making this work and work for free for a corporation that is valued so highly it doesn't even care about them, right? Physicality here is especially problematic because if we accept physicality of models as a legitimate way of coding rules into the game, then you cannot play with any other plastic than that you buy from Games Workshop because it has slightly different properties on the table and is now illegitimate and cannot be used. And this is where we are going, so that really your own modeling, your own home brewing, your own beautiful creations of art that you have put your creativity into, they are now illegitimate, they are now wrong because they are 1 inch too short on this side. Rules of the game rely on the consent of the community, and that is something that we should lift up here. So my attempt in this presentation to answer a little bit the question of what we should be doing about that Mikko has been posting just before, is I am trying to delegitimize the control Games Workshop should have or currently has over what Warhammer 40,000 or what Warhammer is. In any perspective on games, game design, how you play your game is yours. You can have your own house rules. We can decide in the communities that are setting up competitive play or whatever play that is, decide what kind of rules we want to follow ourselves. Games Workshop does not de facto have actually any influence over that. They might make nice figures, they might have cool art. That's what they own. Game rules are not part of that. So there's no real reason for us to allow them to take and become the platform for our creativity, for our culture, and for our play. What we can do about it, Christian has pointed this out, maybe just play other games, get your miniatures somewhere else, buy a 3D printer, paint the stuff you already have at home, don't buy the newest box, right? Do other things without it, just disrespect them. Play F28, local Swedish game designer, from Stockholm, making a game that is completely playable with all your 40K miniatures, has typically your army and a different name there, and it's really, really cool and already features some sort of more out of turn and more dynamic gameplay than 40K, which they have been just going through for a slow belief towards. Try out Open Combat. Very easy, works with kids, like nice. So, but also for the most part, death to Games Workshop, long live miniature games.